Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler, and man, what a weekend for our Baltimore Orioles. First of all, let me say a happy belated Father's Day to any of the dads in our audience because you guys got quite a present as an Orioles fan this weekend. The Orioles sweep the Los Angeles Angels, their third sweep in the last 2 weeks. They swept the White Sox, they swept the Mariners, now they sweep the Angels. Not exactly a murderer's row of teams to beat up on, but these are the kinds of teams that are on the schedule. These are the kinds of teams the Orioles need to beat. And Sunday in particular felt like a therapeutic breakthrough for the Baltimore Orioles. That Tony Mancelino trots out a sort of a B squad type of lineup. You had Holiday on the bench, Rutschman on the bench, O'Hearn on the bench. I feel like I'm missing somebody else. Kowser was on the bench. So four of like your more prominent players, four of your everyday guys when everybody's healthy on the bench, and the Orioles still managed to score 11 runs against Yusei Kikuchi, a good left-handed pitcher, something that has, oftentimes befuddled this Baltimore Orioles team. Like I said, did it with sort of a B squad and clinch a sweep against a team that is above them in the standings, a team that was playing pretty good baseball up until recently, and the Orioles kind of just bury them. And it just feels like if it was a really good weekend. And, that's kind of what I want to talk about right now is the Orioles' current trend upwards, why it's happening. And in particular, I want to talk about the offense because this is essentially going to be like a companion podcast to a blog I've got up on Camden Chat this morning. As I'm recording this, it hasn't posted quite yet, but it should post by the time this podcast goes up. So if you're listening to this, go over to camdenchat.com and check it out. I'll also link to it both in YouTube and the podcast notes of whatever podcast player you might be using. But essentially, what the title of it is, at least how I have it written, is Mike Elias needs the Orioles offense to produce, and they finally are. I can get into that. Some of this stuff I've already talked about on the show, but I'll reiterate it for you all in just a bit. But let's again set the base here of what I'm talking about and the current run that the Orioles are on. So going back to the second game of the doubleheader against the Red Sox on May 24th, the Orioles have played 20 games since then. In those 20 games, they've gone 14-6, by far the best stretch of baseball this year. The best stretch really since the first half of last year. We know things kind of collapsed post All-Star break last year, and they just haven't really gotten back on track since then. Obviously, still made the playoffs last year because they were just so good in the first half. But it's been a a bad team for a calendar year at this point. So going 14-6 in that stretch, in that time, they're scoring more. They scored 11 runs on Sunday. They scored 6 runs on Saturday. They scored 10 runs on Wednesday against the Tigers, 7 runs against the Athletics. The previous Saturday, they're scoring more and more runs. We early in the season it was very boom or bust. They would score 10 runs and then score nothing. Nowadays they're scoring more consistently, 3, 4, 5, 6 runs, and pair that with a pitching staff that is obviously much, much better. And I think, while I'm going to focus on the offense here, you can't just ignore how much better the pitching has been in this run as well. That's a huge component of it. I mean, the pitching staff has been much better since April ended. April, they were atrocious. May, they were like serviceable. And now in June, they're like legitimately a good pitching staff. And that's like up and down the rotation. And the bullpen has been much better. The bullpen had a really bad May after the bullpen was pretty good in April. And now they're kind of both clicking at the same time. So the pitching staff deserves sort of its own standalone episode to talk about. But I want to talk about the offense because the offense was sort of the crowning jewel coming into this season. It was okay. We know the pitching staff is what it is. It's got a ceiling on it, but it's also got theoretically a stable floor. And it's going to be the hitters that kind of raise the ceiling of this team, get us to 90-ish wins, get us to the playoffs, and then we can kind of, retool at the deadline pitching wise and go on a deeper run as a result of that. That hasn't really been the case so far. The pitching was abhorrent early, is getting better. The offense was below average. They got in May, they became about average, and now in June they are well above average at this point. So let's talk about why that's happening. I think first of all we got to start with the stars of the team, and as I write in my blog this morning, I talk about the dynamic duo of Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson. I think these two were under some scrutiny early in the season. Gunnar had missed all of spring training, then wasn't very good in April. He's gotten better in May, even better right now in June. Not hitting for a ton of power just yet, but you can tell things are starting to turn around there. Adley Rutschman obviously really struggled in the second half last year. Kind of came into 2024 being like, oh, he's the best catcher in baseball. Looked like it in the first half, really struggled in the second half. Start of 2025, his peripheral stats have been really good. The batted ball stuff, the patience that, he looks more like 2023 Adley than he did in 2024, and those are promising. But the outcome stats weren't really translating, and yet the Orioles were still putting him second and third in the order pretty much every single night. They're both really hitting well in June. Rutschman's got a 366 batting average with a 438 on base and a 561 slug. In the month of June, Henderson 383 average with a 442 on base, so higher average, higher on base, 489 slug, so a lower slug than Adley, but both, crushing it, over 900 OPS, almost 1,000 OPS for both of them. That's huge. I mean, these are the engine of your team, right? You can do all kinds of things around your stars, but when your stars don't perform, that just brings the potential of the team down so much, and those two are hitting great. The other huge element here is just health. I think there's an element of health to the Gunner stuff. Obviously, missing spring training with the oblique. He kind of used April as his spring training to really get up to 100%, and now we're seeing him work a lot better. But then, of course, these three of Jordan Westburg, Colton Cowser, Gary Sanchez. Now, Sanchez is kind of a separate thing. He's a built-in backup, but he's making $8 million, $8.5 million. He was not brought in to play Sunday day games and sit the bench 6 days a week. He was brought in to play 3 and 4 times a week as a DH, as a catcher to give Adley some rest. You don't give a guy $8.5 million to just play once a week. He's back, hits 2 home runs, including a grand slam in his first couple games back. That's huge. He's not going to do that every single game, but if he can be like the power, the power guy that the Orioles anticipated him being, that's a huge boost to this lineup, and it lengthens the lineup so much. Especially, in the DH spot, if he can hit lefties, you can bring him in to face a lefty. You can give O'Hearn a day off. It just really lengthens the lineup there. And then obviously Jordan Westburg, Colton Cowser, two everyday players for you. A third baseman who's made an all-star team, Colton Cowser, rookie of the year runner-up last year, who's so useful in all aspects of the game. They're both useful in all aspects of the game. Good defenders on their day, productive hitters, good base runners, fast base runners. That, again, it lengthens the lineup so much. Jordan Westburg instead of Ramon Urias. Ramon Urias, look, I find him irreplaceable in a way on the roster, but he does sometimes get exposed if you have to play him every single day and you can't sub him out occasionally. It's good to kind of pick and choose your spots with Ramon Urias. And we're seeing Westburg can spell Holiday at second base too. That's huge because Holiday, look, he's still a young guy, has had a good season, but is going through it a little bit right now. Westburg can play second base, can lead off now. That's huge. And he's already hit a couple home runs as well. Colton Cowser, he's missed the last couple games because he ran into a wall, but it seems like he's going to avoid an IL stint. But again, a plus defender, a guy that, is going to frustrate you a little bit at the plate with the strikeouts and stuff, but just a useful player in general. Getting those three back, huge. No coincidence that the lineup is better with them back. And then Cedric Mullins, Ramon Laureano, they weren't out for too terribly long, but the outfield, them being back really has transformed the outfield paired with Cowser, because that's essentially you've subbed in an everyday outfield in exchange for where you were. Heston Kjerstad goes back down. Dylan Carlson, you can kind of pick your spots with him. You don't have to have Jordan Adams coming up. You don't have to have Jorge Mateo in the outfield. Just they've got basically a starting outfield now where they didn't have that. Still don't have Tyler O'Neill back. That's a whole different story. But you have a legitimate starting outfield now with Cowser, Mullins, and Laureano from left to right. You can sub in Carlson, you can sub in O'Hearn, and these are like, you feel okay about them as substitutions versus you have to put Carlson out there every day. You have to put O'Hearn out there every day. O'Hearn, obviously a good hitter, but defensively challenged in the outfield, to say the least. So this is just such a more strong, legitimate outfield than what the Orioles have had for much of the season, where the outfield's really been a weakness of theirs. And then there's the development of the young hitters. I've talked about Holiday and Kjerstad already, kind of, opposite sides of this. Holiday has really shown a lot of growth this season. Still, not perfect, but he's got a 108 WRC plus on the season. He's an 8% above league average hitter, playing second base, where second base sometimes can kind of be an offensive black hole for a lot of teams. For the Orioles, that's not the case. He's been able to step in and hit leadoff for a lot. I think he's going to probably be removed from that for a little bit if Westbrook can do it instead, if Cowser can do it instead, something like that. But he's an option for them now. Kjerstad, like I said, really struggled It was time for him to kind of take a step back there, and they did. He's back down at Norfolk now. He even had a couple days off when he first got there to kind of tweak some mechanical things before throwing him right into a game. He'll be back. He'll contribute in some way, but the Royals don't have to thrust him into playing every single day when he clearly just wasn't really able to do the job, both offensively and defensively, where arguably his defense was even worse than his offense. Just not a very helpful player out there in the outfield. And then finally, you have Kobe Mayo, who, this is more of a mixed bag right now. Obviously, the numbers aren't great for Kobe Mayo overall right now. He's got a 527 OPS on the season, but things are looking a lot better. His at bats are better. He doesn't look overmatched anymore. He's 8 for 19 in his last 6 games as of this recording. That includes 3 doubles, which all 3 of those are his first 3 extra base hits in Major League Baseball. He struck out 5 times in 6 games, but walked 3 times as well. That's a pretty good mix there. That feels like a guy that's seeing the ball. And look, he's going to strike out. He's a power guy. He's going to get his strikeouts, but he's walking 3 times. That's important too. You need to be walking, you know, in the realm of reasonable. A walk every other game is about what you expect from a good power hitting player. And yeah, 8 for 19. That's a good little run there. It's a minute sample size. I'm not going to say he's solved the league or anything, but he's done a nice job there. And he's thrown in a stolen base as well. That's nice. And the defense at first base is pretty good as well. He's not Ryan Mountcastle over there, but offensively, him right now might be better than what Mountcastle was getting. Still not a ton of power, just 3 doubles. But that home run's bound to happen. It's pretty common for young players to have doubles power for a year or two. That was very common with Manny Machado early on. And Machado and Mayo's body types are similar. Manny was a little bit lankier, not quite as tall, I don't think, as Mayo is, but you can see some similarities there, at least I do. So I think it's just a matter of time before he starts hitting home runs there. He's a little older than Manny was when he debuted, but the principles are the same. And it's, tends to be a natural progression from doubles power to home run power. When you go from year 1 to year 2, and that's basically where Mayo's at right now. He didn't play a full year last year, but he's looking a lot better at the plate, and that's really encouraging. And if he can play first base a little bit, if he can spell O'Hearn, if he can let O'Hearn DH, because O'Hearn's been dealing with I think an ankle recently, get him off his feet a little bit more often, but keep his bat in the lineup. That's huge as well. And it's just not something the Orioles were getting early in the season. Mayo came up early, looked really bad, went back down, after looking bad in the spring as well and getting sent down initially. This is his, kind of third time up this year if you count spring training, and it feels like he's starting to see the ball a little bit. He's made some adjustments. He looks a lot better. And we're not, like I said, not going to say he solved the league or anything, but it looks a lot better now than he did early in the season. I think so. Holiday, Mayo, Kerstad, you're learning things about these young guys. You're learning maybe some of them need more seasoning, maybe some of them need more tweaks, whatever it might be. But the Orioles are again progressing there. So you're solving problems. You are getting guys into situations that they can thrive in. And for Kerstad right now, that's in Norfolk where he can work on things in a less pressure packed environment. And for Mayo and Holiday, that's giving them more regular roles. Holiday, they've talked about with Mancelino taking over. He told Holiday, "You're going to play every day," and that's essentially what he's doing. He's taking days off here and there to protect him. He's dropped down in the order here recently because he's not hitting great in June. Only a 76 WRC plus in June, so he's been 24% below league average this month. Not great, but that's the ebbs and flows of the season. Overall, he's been much better this year than he was last year. Looks like he's grown a ton, and I think that's again a huge step for these Orioles. And just overall, looking at the Orioles in this 20-game stretch where they're 14-6, they've scored 4.3 runs per game for a WRC plus of 105. Prior to that, the start of the season through, I guess that was May 23rd, they were scoring 3.8 runs per game and had a 97 WRC plus. So, from a 3% below league average team to a 5% above league average team hitting wise, things have been even better in June. I think they have like a 115 WRC plus, something like that. I looked at it yesterday. I can't remember, but it's something around that where you know, they were good in the very end of May. They've gotten a lot of guys back at the start to mid of June, and they've taken off since then. And it's not a coincidence. You got your guys back. Really, all they're missing now is Mountcastle and O'Neill. And you can argue, when those guys were playing, they weren't exactly contributing a lot anyway. Potentially they've been dealing with injury stuff all year, but they weren't playing great anyway. So it's not that you can say you sub them in and they're even, 5% better. I think where the Orioles are at right now is the best they've been all season, and it's been a lot of fun to watch. And so that brings us to the standings. And what I wanted to do was take a look at the standings on May 24th when this streak kind of began. And I could probably even look at the 23rd, honestly, because that's the day before, and it should have through the end of the day on the 23rd where the Orioles stood. And the Orioles were 16 and 33. They were 10 and a half games back in the wild card. Look, again, I'm going to talk about the wild card. Um, sure, the division is mathematically within reach. The Yankees just got swept. There's the outside shot there, but I think if we're talking about the Orioles making the playoffs at all, you're going to be talking about the wild card. It's just a much more feasible path. One less team to jump, and the Yankees are, pretty far out there. So, 10 and a half games back of the wild card, which on May 23rd at the end of the day was the Royals at 28 and 24. So a four games above 500 team. The +2 run differential is who the Orioles were chasing. The Orioles had a -99 run differential, and they were 10 and a half games back at the end of the day on May 23rd. Then, of course, May 24th, they played a doubleheader with the Red Sox. They actually split those games. So I just counted the second game as the start of the streak, where they're 14 and 6. But same principle applies. And now at the end of the day on Sunday, the 15th, which was yesterday as of this recording, the Orioles are 30 and 40, 6 games back of the wild card, a -73 run differential. And they are now chasing the Mariners, a team they swept not so long ago, who have a -2 run differential. The Blue Jays, who are a game and a half ahead of them, have a -12 run differential. The Twins, the Red Sox. The Red Sox are ahead of the Orioles right now. Red Sox just traded Rafael Devers. Maybe their pitching staff gets a little bit better with Jordan Hicks and Kyle Freeland. You'd think their offense is going to get worse too. They're still missing Alex Bregman. I can't see how the Red Sox get better in 2025 from the trade they just made. So maybe that makes them easier to catch. The Orioles have a lot of games against the Red Sox left. Other teams ahead of them. Angels are ahead of them. The Orioles have played them 6 times, won 5 of those games. Still a 3-game gap there. Then the Royals, the Guardians. The Orioles have already beaten the Guardians in a series this year. The Rangers, they haven't played them yet. The Red Sox, they have more games against them. The Twins is the one that stands out. The Orioles are 0-6 against the Minnesota Twins this year. If the Orioles just go 500 against the Twins, they're 33 and 37. They're what, 4.5 games back at that point. It makes a big difference. The fact the Orioles can't beat the Minnesota Twins this year is, if they don't make the playoffs, you're going to look at that at the end of the season and go, wow, yeah, the team was bad, but they couldn't beat the Twins, who, look, credit to the Twins. They're a fine baseball team with some good players. They're 36 and 35. If they haven't played the Orioles this year, they'd be 30 and 35. Like, minus the 6 wins with the Orioles, they're a sub 500 team. So it's and it all, the Orioles are probably going to beat some teams this year that they shouldn't. I think they've already won a series against the Yankees. So it's stuff like that. It's not perfect. But all that to say that in 2 weeks, essentially, well, 3 weeks, the Royals have shaved 4 games off of their wild card gap. They've improved their run differential by, what is it? By 27 runs, 26 runs. And the teams ahead of them are getting worse. Like I said before, they were chasing a team that was 4 games above 500 with fewer games played. Now they're chasing a team that's 2 games above 500, and it's a team they've already swept once this year. This can happen, guys, and the only way it can happen though is if the offense lives up to its expectations. And I said this recently. I think I said it similarly in a blog last week, so I'm a little bit reiterating the point. But I think it's so important that the crux of this team is the offense. And the pitching was bad in April, and I don't think the offense could have been a little bit better, and the Orioles could have won a few more games. But with how bad the pitching was in April, the Orioles were going to be in a hole coming out of April. Then you get into May, where the pitching was closer to serviceable. I think they were still in the bottom third of the league, but they were more like reasonably major league quality than they had been in April. And I think that's where you say, okay, offense, you need to start like kicking it up a notch, being closer to the potential we thought you were going to be, that we can start closing this gap a little bit. Didn't really happen. They were a little bit better, especially at the end of the month, but not fantastic. And now in June, you're seeing them be much, much better. And I make that point in this blog to say that essentially the Orioles were an elite offense last year. They were, I think, fourth in the league in runs scored. The offense is essentially unchanged. You swapped out Anthony Santander goes to Toronto. You bring in Tyler O'Neill. Both of them have been pretty bad this year, and both have been injured. So that's kind of a wash there. Like, personality wise and vibes wise, I think you'd rather have Santander. He's been an Oriole for so long and, done a lot of great things. But in terms of outcomes on the field, the Orioles haven't really lost anything there because they've both been hurt this year. But the Orioles came into the season they're supposed to be good again. You brought back the same crew that scored the fourth most runs in the league last year. Really, the only difference was the O'Neill for Santander placement, and you basically were handing the job to Holiday at second base, which they tried to do in April last year, but it obviously didn't work out. They didn't make any plans to replace Holiday, so that was the only other major change in the offensive side of things was Holiday was going to be the everyday second baseman. Um, and they didn't make a ton of like impactful changes to the pitching staff. Obviously, Sagano and Morton were figured to be safe, reliable veteran options. It has not worked out that way for Morton, although he's been better. It has worked out that way for Sagano, but they were lacking the upside when they lost Corbin Burns and then Grayson Rodriguez went down. And kind of sat on their hands and said, like, look, the offense is going to buoy us to be a 500 team probably by the deadline. We'll make some moves. Bradish will come back. Rodriguez will come back. The pitching staff will be a middle of the pack unit. The offense will be a top five unit, and we'll get into the playoffs and we'll figure it out from there. And that hasn't happened. And you've seen Brandon Hyde lose his job. And I think with how bad the offense was early in the year, you got to turn towards Mike Elias and say, all right, Mike, what's the deal, man? Like, okay, I'll give you a pass on the pitching staff a little bit. You kind of, bought into your own hype there in terms of what this team could be. You've owned it that the pitching staff was not set up for success by you. You've owned that. You've said that publicly. You've said it to the players. It sounds like the players appreciated that. But the hitting side of things, that's all on you as well. Of course, there's coaching elements to it. There's injury stuff to it as well. But when you're in the middle of what's supposed to be a competitive window, a World Series contention window, you can't have hiccups like this. You can't have, it'd be one thing if the pitching staff was horrible and the offense was elite and you guys were sort of still, below average overall, but it was both a bad offense and a horrific pitching staff. And that starts to call into question the process by which this team was built. It calls into question your theory of the case as far as young players and how valuable they are. And should you be holding on to them? Should you be trading them? You've kind of just held on to them apart from Joey Ortiz and then DL Hall, who wasn't a prospect anymore, to get Burns, a deal that I agree with. And I think it was great value for what you did. But you've held on to Mayo, who was struggling. You've held on to Kerstad, who was struggling. Holiday was built as the next great thing. He wasn't great in 2024, and then he had some struggles early this year. It's all those questions start to pop up and saying, maybe our GM, he knows how to build a base of an organization, but when it comes to time to win, he doesn't know what he's doing. That narrative can spin on its head a little bit if the Orioles play the way they are playing for the rest of the season. I don't think they have to make the playoffs for Mike Elias to keep his job. But I do think he needs to prove his theory of the case, which is I can build an elite offensive machine. And I was a little too conservative with the pitching, and that's on me. But look, the pitching's turning around. Morton's been better, and I can trade him for something if we're not in it anymore, and that can turn into something in the future. I can trade Sagano, Eflin. I can turn these guys into pieces so that we're still contending next year. And we're going to get Grayson back. We're going to get Bradish back. And look, now that's a base I have to work off for a pitching staff. So look, my offense is elite. It is a top five offense from, May 24th through the end of the year or from June 1st through the end of the year, or whatever. And yeah, we dug ourselves too big of a hole. But I've learned from all of this experience that I know what I'm doing with the offense. I just need them to stay healthy. And I will be more aggressive on the pitching front to support the top of the rotation. Because I think a lot of what Elias did this year was get back end guys to just sort of, build support for the rotation in general. He didn't really go over any top end, go after top end guys, or at least got rebuffed by them. We know they offered Burns a deal. They were rumored to be interested in a couple other guys, but didn't go for the final blow there to get him in the door. And instead it was hopefully Bradish gets healthy. Rodriguez will be our de facto ace. Morton, Sagano, Kramer, Povich. We'll see how it goes. And that just was an illogical decision. It was too conservative. And you can say he's learned his lesson from that. Maybe David Rubenstein and the other ownership group members can have that conversation and say, look, you've built a strong organization. We are back in the mix in Latin America. We've had top prospects, top farm systems. The team was really good in 23 and 24. We had a hiccup in 25. You recognized it early enough to get the manager out. Let's let's do this thing again in 2026. But seriously, Mike, this is your shot, man. You got to make this count. I don't know that I would say World Series a bust necessarily, but I would say deep playoff runner bust in 2026. But all of that, the caveat on all of that is what the Orioles look like from here to the end of the season. Mike Elias needs to prove that his methods, his process is not as flawed as it seemed in April and early May. He needs to prove I know what I'm doing with building an offense and the pitching stuff. The thought process was there, but I got hamstrung by uncharacteristically bad pitching by Charlie Morton, a veteran that's got this long track record, and an injury to Grayson Rodriguez that I wasn't anticipating. If the Orioles have in fact gotten this right with the GM, then that's awesome. They don't have to have huge, extensive changes this offseason. They can say, look, Mike, take your medicine, figure it out. The biggest thing you got to do is figure out the manager role. Is it Mancelino's job? He's done a nice job. We'll see what happens from here to the end of the year. There's been no murmurs about them naming a permanent manager, so maybe Mancelino sees the rest of the season out. I don't know why you'd make a change when the team is playing pretty well. But that could be the biggest thing. And instead of looking for a GM this offseason, the Orioles can say, our current one, he did a good job with a lot of things. We got to get him over the hump. He's learned some lessons in 2025, and now we can kind of take that as a really hard, lesson that he learned, and we can move forward from this. And this can be kind of part of his legacy of 2025, the year he got kind of smacked on the head a little bit. His ego got bruised, and now the Orioles are better because of it. It would be interesting to see that happen. And the current direction they're going, that might be what happens, because I think with the Orioles, if they eclipse 80 wins this year based on how poor they were, through April and middle of May, I think that's huge. And I don't see, and the only scenario where that happens is the offense is fantastic. So I don't see you changing the GM in that situation. I could be wrong about that, but that would be kind of my read of the situation. So yeah, it's just an interesting development how well the Orioles have played these last 3 weeks, and better than I thought they were going to be. And they've got essentially what, 3 weeks until the All-Star break. If they can get another 4 games, they'd be what, 6 games under 500, 5 games under 500. By the All-Star break, you're now talking about being back in the playoff picture a little bit. I mean, teams that are 400, 500 right now is the Royals, the Angels. They're 3 games back the wild card. And if you're winning at that rate, you're gonna keep pace with the Mariners, the Blue Jays, the Twins, right there for that final wild card spot. And then now instead of selling, you're talking about buying at the deadline. Good move, bad move. We can talk about that in a couple weeks, but the Orioles are putting themselves in a position to have those conversations rather than sell things off right now, which I think a month ago you wouldn't have thought that was possible. I didn't think it was possible. And it still might not work out that way, but it's been a really impressive run there, and I'm pleased that the Orioles are making the Orioles fun to watch again. It's something I want to turn on every night versus like some days I'm like, I'll just watch it on game day and track the box score versus like humiliating myself for 2.5 hours when I could be doing something else, hanging out with my kids or my wife or whatever. I'll just kind of have it on in the background. Now it's something I want to watch. Um, but anyway, that's about all I've got for this episode. I do want to remind everybody we are part of the Believe Podcast Network. So go over to believe.com. That's BLEAV.com to check out our show as well as others. You can follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and Blue Sky at The Warehouse Pod. And we are, of course, on YouTube. Just search The Warehouse Pod on there. We'll pop up. We've got a little over 300 subscribers. You'll see our artwork there, and give us a follow and a subscribe there. It's totally free, and you can also get involved in the conversation in the comments section. So let us know what you think of the Orioles offense. Are they proving themselves right? Do you like Elias? Do you want him to hang on? And yeah, just let us know in the comment section. But thank you so much for listening. My name is Tyler, and this has been the Warehouse Podcast.